Hey, Joel here again by myself this morning. Ben is gone for a couple weeks, I think, and has left me to fill in. So you get me 2 days in a row. Once again, Carrie's the first one in. How did I know that? Hey, Lucas is here. Missed you yesterday, I think, Lucas. I don't. But communism rearing its ugly head. I'm going to start now that there's people actually in studio. Don't look like Michael kept you too long. I'm going to share a little something here that I think tells the whole story on communism. Okay. All right. So that was obviously Robin Williams, Moscow on the Hudson, years ago, back in the Cold War days. That was in the 80s when the Soviet Union was still there. A lot of us probably still remember that. Good morning, Jacqueline. AC, good morning. Anybody else here? Nope. Yeah, great talent, Robin Williams. So obviously what that represented was in a little microcosm. I think it's the best thing I've ever seen produced in a nutshell, getting directly to the point. So Robin Williams is a communist defector who comes to the United States in the 80s, and he goes shopping. And the first thing, if you notice, that he asked, he goes, coffee. And he says, aisle 2. And he goes, no, where's the line for coffee? There's got to be a line. There's going to be a long 3-hour line for coffee, because that's the only thing he knows, because that's communism. And then obviously in the Soviet Union, you didn't have a choice of coffee. You didn't have Folgers and Sanka and whatever that, decaffeinated nut flavor, whatever. And he's overwhelmed. He's freaking out. And if you look at all the comments, and how much you trust the comments on these things, I don't know. But if you look at the comments, there's a lot of people that said, yeah, this is how people who came from the Soviet Union actually react. They actually have either anxiety attacks and freak out like he did, or sometimes they go into shock. They just stand there, and people have to come up and help them because they're so overwhelmed with the choice. Because in communism, you don't have that choice. And the reason I bring it up, obviously, this communism rearing its ugly head. The most obvious thing, and I talked about it yesterday, was this mayoral election in New York, where the Muslim man who no one saw coming, and I don't have his name. Someone can type it in. I'm sure they know. And he's a communist. He's running on a communist. He says he's a socialist, but he's a communist. We call it what it is. Call it spade a spade. It's he is advocating, universal health care. One of the scariest thing I've heard that he's advocating is more enforcement for hate crime laws, which means free speech in New York will be gone. Okay. But the most telling thing he proposed was government-run supermarkets. And this gets right back to this. This is what maybe gave me the idea to show you what the difference is, just dramatized by Robin Williams. Government-run grocery stores have one type of coffee, and you will have to wait in line for 2 hours eventually. Zoran, that's right. Zorhan Mamdani. Okay. And he won the Democratic primary, which means he'll win the mayor's race. He'll win. We'll have a communist mayor of New York City. And, New York is, what happens in New York spreads. New York's the cultural center of the country. It's the biggest, most famous city in the country, probably most famous city in the world. If New York goes communist, folks, we're going to have to deal with communism. It's just going to happen. Liberal, this is where the Democratic Party has gone. close to half the country is, I don't know what the statistics are, but it used to be the country was shaded Democrat. Now I'm not sure, but let's say it's 50-50. Half the people out there are in a party that is now headed down the road to communism. And that's just the reality we're going to have to face. Another factor in this that's got me thinking that communism is going to come, and this is what happened in New York, is just a product of kind of the Woody Allen, Sex and the City, Seinfeld, Friends kind of New York reality. New York is a big place with a lot of people stacked on top of each other that take the same train. They go to the same places. They eat at the same places. A lot of them don't drive. They never leave the city. They're confined. New York has it's its own world. If you know anybody from New York, you know that. I used to have a boss from New York. He was about as New York as you could possibly get. He was obnoxious and loud, tough. Good guy, but I got tired of his New York act, you know. But it is its own little world, and that's what this is the product of. And like I said yesterday, it was mostly young liberal women that voted him in because they love the idea of government giving you everything and taking control of everything, especially things like childcare. That's great to them. So, because their lifestyles lend to that. When you're stacked on one on top of the other and you're all living the same place, freedom, individuality erodes away. It's much, much easier. And this is kind of the socialist communist plan. That's the way, the worldview. If you get a lot of people together on top of each other and they rely on government transportation like they do in New York, I mean, you have to pay for the subway, but that's going to go away. And how else are you going to get around? It's a nice grid. You can walk, but if you want to get somewhere quickly, you got to take that subway. If you're going out to LaGuardia or Kennedy, or you're going, I don't know, if you're going from Manhattan over to Queens, that Uber ride was an hour and a half. Okay. So it's much easier to control a population and influence a population and win them over with promises of free stuff if they're all in one place. And nothing exemplifies people being all in one place more than New York. So that's what this is a product of. Just years and years of conditioning, democratic rule there, and just the lifestyle and the worldview of everybody being in one place. It just fosters liberalism, and then it just goes into socialism. So that's where New York is headed. That when I was a kid, New York was an awful place, full of crime. When the Black House happened, people ransacked the city. Son of Sam was running around. All this, it was a very depressing place. And it went bankrupt at one point. And I remember President Ford, when I was in high school, I remember they appealed to him for relief, and he said, "Sorry, New York, I'm not going to bail you out." And also, New York was going to go bankrupt. And actually, the song "New York State of Mind," one of my favorite songs, Billy Joel, he wrote that song because he went back to New York when he was in LA, and he heard that. He said, "I got to go. If New York's going down, I'm going to go down with it," because he's a New Yorker, right? He's got this New York state of mind. And he wrote that song riding the Greyhound down the Hudson River line. He tells that story. So that was the reality of New York. It was a violent, dirty place. And then Rudy Giuliani got elected in the 90s, cleaned it up, and it became habitable, it became livable. But this is what happens. Republicans and conservatives come in and clean up the messes that Democrats make. And then things get really, really good. And then liberalism takes over because people take it for granted. Their life is easy now. It's comfortable. And they think, maybe we should have free child care for everyone. Maybe we should, what is this idea of government, grocery stores? Maybe that's fair, you know, um, all these things. And next thing you know, it's a cycle. But this, you could tell the cycle is going downward because back in the 70s, no one would have said they were a communist or socialist. So um, the New York State Thruway bailed them out. Oh, was that like a toll road or something? Is that what happened? Uh, I assume you're talking about the bankruptcy. So yeah, really foolish little girls, you know. Um, so okay, yeah, it is. That's what I thought. Um, yeah, but then okay, so they weren't bankrupt. They had this idea to have a throughway that paid, bailed them out, and then things got really good, and now they're going downhill again. It's just a natural cycle. Man's, this is unregenerate man. New York is a very secular place. It's got dozens and dozens of beautiful old churches. So you go to any city in the United States, really, but especially on the East Coast, you'll see these beautiful cathedrals. St. Patrick's, I think, is the one in New York we were in. Gorgeous, empty, but gorgeous. A lot of those are, I think we passed one that's now churches are now yoga studios, or they're, jazzercise centers, or they're, I don't know, co-work spaces. They're not churches anymore. They're empty. Because that's what the secular mind does. So Lucas, 3 bags of chips for $15 with minimum wage being $17.45 an hour. There's only about 2.5 potatoes in those 3 bags. That's how you tell us communism. Right. It's the inefficiencies in communism. It just fosters it. It perpetuates itself. So that's what I'm saying. This particular expression of communism is going to take over all the big cities. The big cities are already on their way out. LA especially. LA has shown us time and time again, it's hell bent on destroying itself. My city, the city I grew up in. And it really gets down to the same idea. When you get a bunch of people in one place together, and that's what pretty much the Industrial Revolution did. It made things centralized for manufacturing and for transportation of goods. It just made sense. Excuse me. Excuse me. It just made sense to do that. But now, with technology kind of spreading things out, people living together, you have to abandon the idea of God, because the state moves in, and the government replaces God, and that's the communist ideal. Out in the rural part of the countries, in rural settings, people are far apart. They're more independent, and actually they rely on their neighbors more, because if your neighbor's couple hundred yards down the road, doesn't have that much influence on you. But if your barn is on fire, or if someone is sick and you need to call on that neighbor, they're the only ones you have. So you better be on a good terms with them. In New York, you can yell out the window, shut up, whatever, all that stuff that typically is New York. And you're just kind of anonymous. You're just kind of another face, another body amongst millions of bodies. But if there's very few people around you, and even in my neighborhood, we're in the north part of San Diego County, there's a lot of people in this neighborhood, but we're spread out and we know each other. If I yelled, shut up at my neighbor or whatever, I'd have a problem, because it's just, there's not that many people around. But in a city, if you got a bunch of people around, you kind of go anonymous, and there's not that need for community. There's not that need for, for civility in a lot of ways. So you get cities are declining. They're in decline, and rural areas, with the technology, people are discovering that they can live anywhere they want. But so that's this expression of communism happening in New York is definitely a city phenomenon, and New York is the ultimate city. Okay, so I think this kind of thing is going to spread. But the other way I think communism is going to rear its ugly head is because of technology. I mean, technology has enabled us to live, more separate, live where we want to live, away from these crowded cities. But the thing, again, I'm going to go back to it, and I've talked about this several times, is AI. And you can't get away from it now. In the next couple of years, so many jobs are going to be replaced, and it's going much faster than we thought it was, and we're not prepared for it. And society and our leaders have done a terrible job of preparing us for this. There's going to be millions, I think it's 300 million jobs worldwide are going to go away in the next 5 years for sure. Some people saying in the next 2 years. Well, that's not adjustable. If 300 million jobs go away, 300 million people are going to be out of work, and we have to do something. There's going to be a huge clamoring for them to have money. And there we have what a lot of people are calling for is universal basic income. And it's really shocking to me how many people think that a universal basic income is a good idea. It's basically the government giving you what it determines as a living wage. And the numbers I've heard, they're not a living wage, at least not in California. But that is the ultimate communist idea, because that money's got to come from somewhere. It's going to come from us. It's going to come from people who haven't lost their jobs. And that's one of the foundation of communists is from each according to his ability, to each according to their need. And people don't see it that way. People don't see that as socialist or communistic, but it is. So many of what we have accepted as just kind of liberalism, or maybe even socialism, we call it socialism. But when you get down to it, socialism is just a step towards communism. So, AC, earning a living will be a thing of the past. Not for everybody, but I know what you're saying. It'll change the ethic of society. We've built this entire society. I'm just looking at my screen right now, all the things that it represents, the lamp behind me, and the bookcase, and this house, this technology, this microphone, right? The ability for me, this camera, I can cover it up, right? It's all built on an ethic that says you earn your way, you earn a living, you have a better idea, you work harder. And if that goes away, this is a fragile, knife's edge existence we have. And if we lose that, and we start to lose, then we'll start to slip off the knife edge, and it'll start slicing us up. So, I put a value to video game currency to be worth real life money at a percentage. That way people can still make money in a UBI world. You value video game currency to be worth real life money. Yeah, I'm not a video game guy. You'd have to flesh that out a little bit for me. But I mean, any form of currency, maybe a medical field, will be the last to survive. Yeah, maybe. They're talking about all the white collar jobs that are going to go away. Anything to do with sitting at a computer, entering data, or having input outcome, a repetitive task, on a computer will be gone. And that's white collar work. So, um, yeah, trades. But in a lot of the trades, I was talking to my wife, and she's like, "Well, what? How can I think we were talking about immigration and um, because that's a big deal here, especially in California." And she was asking, "Well, how will AI is not going to affect you know picking crops?" And I said, "Yes, it will. I think it will, because even there, something like that, they'll AI, in my imagination, will take over the planning of crops and harvest. So it will tell a robot how to plow and plant a field, a grove, say, of apple trees, with the idea that this is the ultimate, the what would you call it? The optimum way to plant a tree and water it so it will grow, and then a robot will come by and pick the apples, and that will all be engineered by AI. So even things like that, um, I agree. AI can pick crops and build a 3D house. Yeah. Okay, Lucas, you spend real dollars in a game for 10 million game dollars. It should be reversible in game microtransaction. Okay. Service jobs will always be needed. Someone needs to repair the AI, not foolproof. Yeah. From your lips to God's ears, Jacqueline. I don't know. It's such a brave new world. And it's something that I can't even have a hard time picturing. So all this is leading to, I think it's going to fundamentally change society. People say it's going to disrupt society, like technologies always disrupt society. At the very least, I think it's going to take a sledgehammer to society, to the foundations of our society. And that's been happening for a long time on a social level, but now on an economic level, it's going to come. And on a ethical level, it's going to come, because the work ethic that we have is what makes us. I know the Protestant work ethic, it goes all the way back to colonial times, and who conquered what part of the world, who colonized what part of the world, and the difference between the English and Dutch colonies is much different than the Spanish and French colonies, that are now. And you want to live in the English and Dutch colonies, because that's the Protestant work ethic has made those places, first world like, where a lot of the other countries' colonies aren't. And that's what has set us apart in the Western world. So if that goes away, and the Bible, to put it in a Christian perspective, a lot of people will point to the Bible as supporting communism. It absolutely does not. A lot of people will point to the book of Acts, the early church. They all were one and didn't consider anything of their own, but they sold what they had and gave to the poor, which is true. But that was not compelled by government. They did it voluntarily. They didn't consider anything theirs, but it still was theirs. And when Ananias and Sapphira sold their land and came and gave the money, and Peter said, "Is this all that you sold? Is this everything that you sold the land for?" And they said, "Oh yeah, it was." When it wasn't. Well, that's what got them. That's what killed them. It wasn't that they didn't give all the money for the land. They lied about it. And Peter said to Ananias, he said, it was yours. You didn't even have to sell it. You could have told us, "Hey, I'm giving you 3/4 of the profits. I'm keeping 20% mine." Or you could have not done it at all. It was yours. You could do whatever you want. That's not communism. That's personal property. That's ownership of personal property, which is one of the foundations of communism is no personal property. Okay, but in the Bible talks a lot about personal property um, as something given to us to steward. God owns everything, but He gives it to us and expects us to steward it ourselves individually. And if we're generous, it's supposed to come from our generous heart, not from government mandates. So, um, yeah, I think you're right. This is going to be boom time for therapists. I tell my wife that she's a therapist. So, um, but really, the central Christian perspective on communism is communism is based at its very foundation, at its very core, on the idea, on the atheist idea. There is no room for God in communism because the state is God. And any idea that you have personal responsibility, that you are entrusted by God with some either time, money, resources, if you put your faith in something that's bigger than yourself, that's bigger than the government, they can't have that. That's why every communist country has been ruthlessly oppressive of religious faith. Get a book called God's Smuggler by Brother Andrew, if you have any doubt about that. So the central tenet of communism is God does not exist. And the biggest threat to communism is the idea that God does exist and that we have a personal responsibility before Him. He is the ultimate authority. He is bigger than the state. Communism can't have that. So I think what we have we're going to have a battle down the road. There's going to be a pretty big split in the next couple of years, maybe in the next 5 years. If AI, if we keep charging forward with AI, everybody says it's going to ruin society and it's probably eventually going to destroy us, according to the people who created it. And yet, full speed ahead, we got to do this before someone else does it. That kind of thing. We're headed for a lot of disruptions in society, and I think one of the things that's going to come up is a call for basically communism. They're not going to call it communism. They're going to probably soften it with socialism or democratic socialism or whatever. But don't fall for it. We can't fall for it. We've got to trust God that He will, with our ethic, if we don't lose that work ethic, we've got to trust that God will come through for us and that He will honor that and bless us with it. And we can't answer this siren's call for communism, no matter how it's dressed up, and no matter how it appeals to fairness or equity or whatever. We've got to resist it. We got to tell our children to resist it because they're the ones who are going to have to live with it. So hopefully history will teach us something. Hopefully that's another thing communism does. It erases history because all of history tells us that communism is a disaster. So, but on that cheery note, have a good weekend. We're winding down. Thanks for listening. I will be back next Thursday. I'll probably be back next Friday too, because I think Ben's on vacation. So have a good day, folks. Thanks again for listening and for the comments. Appreciate it. Take care.